Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. My name is Robert Hawkins. I'm the MLA for Yellowknife Centre. I'm also the chair of the Economic Development and Environment Committee. Today before us we have a briefing from the Minister of Infrastructure regarding low water levels and the impacts on the marine transportation services. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed around the world on the Assembly's social media channel, and I welcome all of those from every corner of the universe jumping in today. I will now introduce members to move things along swiftly. Online, we have Mr. McNeely, MLA for the SAW2. To my left, we have Mr. Narasu, MLA for Mackenzie Delta. Mr. Morris, MLA for Frame Lake. On my right, we have MLA Morgan, my apologies, it's been a long morning. MLA Morgan for MLA Yellowknife North, and Ms. Reed for MLA Great Slave. We are doing a public presentation, and just as a fresh reminder, although staff are well versed in this, please put all questions and processes through the chair. We need the mics on. Staff are running the mics, so everything should appear seamless. If we speak off mic, the millions of public following this detailed, important briefing will not be able to hear us speak. So that said, at this particular time, I'd like to now pass the mic on to the Minister. Please introduce your accompanying staff, and when you're ready, please proceed with your briefing. We look forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, with me today from the Department of Infrastructure, I have Ms. Tracy St. Dennis on my right, Assistant Deputy Minister of Programs and Services. On my left, Mr. Steve Hagerman, Director of Marine Transportation Services. Also in the room with us, Jennifer Lucas, Senior Advisor to the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure, and Drew Robertson, Ministerial Special Advisor in my office. We are all here to provide a briefing on marine transportation services and challenges related to low water. This is an opportunity to give a bit of an update on some of the operational plans that are underway to service the Univiality Settlement region, as well as customers on Great Slave Lake, in addition to low water concerns. As we discussed when we were here back in March, MTS's work during 2023's season was extremely challenging. Historic low water on the Mackenzie River, as well as 2 evacuations of the town of Hay River due to wildfires, meant that MTS and Fuel Services Division staff were making decisions both prior to and throughout the season based on rapidly changing conditions. This season has been even more challenging. Historic low water has resulted in the cancellation of barges to Fort Good Hope, Toledo, Norman Wells, and cargo for the Univiality Settlement region is being redirected through Tuktoyaktuk and Inuvik. We acknowledge these cancellations will be having an impact on residents, businesses, communities, and Indigenous governments. GNWT officials have recently met with some of the Indigenous government representatives to help gain a better understanding of some of the impacts. These discussions, of course, are crucial in allowing us to work together to build response plans that will best fit both the unique needs and perspectives of communities. We are taking the issue, of course, very seriously, considering our financial capacity and exploring what we hope are innovative solutions. While we acknowledge the financial constraints, we are committed to finding creative ways to help address some of these challenges. A whole of government approach is being utilized. There is support from different levels of government, and it's a multifaceted challenge that cannot be addressed in isolated pieces. And additionally, by thoroughly assessing the situation and identifying specific needs, we are hoping to be able to seek targeted support from the federal government that can bolster our response and support longer-term resilience of communities and industries. And finally, as requested by committee, our briefing today will conclude with contingency planning that's already underway for the 2024 season, including how we are hoping to adapt to a situation of continued low water. With that, Mr. Chair, I will first turn it over to the Assistant Deputy Minister to start off the presentation.
Thank you, Minister. I now would like to recognize ADM St. Denis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following presentation is going to be a shared approach between myself and Steve Hagerman, the Director of Marine Transportation Services. I'll take us through the first few slides and then I'll be handing it over to him.
We can move it just if you want to say, if you want to say next slide.
Next slide.
If we're having troubles, no problem.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, today we wanted to provide Standing Committee a bit of an overview on a few different areas of our operation. I'm going to quickly do an overview of what MTS is, the essential resupply role that we play to a variety of communities. Also want to share some discussions that we've had with the Department of Environment and Climate Change in utilizing their low water data. And then Steve is going to walk us through the plans around how equipment was overwintered based on last year's season. We're going to also go through what we've done throughout this past winter to prepare for this season, for the 2024 season, and then a discussion on some low water mitigation work that's underway and review the impacts that this historically low water has had on the MTS operation. Mr. Hagerman will walk us through the current schedule and then plans to move our remaining cargo for our customers. And then finally, I'll loop back and do a bit of a looking ahead 2025 summary.
Fantastic.
Next slide. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Mr. Chair, wanted to maybe flag for committee, we did provide a bit of an update back in March when we were preparing for the 2024 season. Wanted to just highlight some of the core work that MTS does, primarily fuel resupply to a vast majority of our communities. This slide provides a bit of a footprint that shows the variety of communities that MTS services, as well as a little bit of an update at the end on what we do for the Department of National Defense for some late season charter work. So primarily MTS, as mentioned, does community fuel resupply. Vast majority of large, possibly awkward pieces of material required for GNWT capital projects, as well as providing dry goods for ISR communities in the High Arctic, Sax Harbor, Uluwaktuk, Paulatuk, and then Tuktoyaktuk as well. We continue to provide support to Great Slave Lake, and Mr. Hagerman will walk through that later in this presentation. We additionally provide support on Great Slave Lake to the tourism sector as well as Parks Canada. Moving on to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, we do quite a bit of close work in data sharing and collection with the Department of Environment and Climate Change. The following 4 slides provide us a bit of an overview of the water levels on the Mackenzie River and then Great Slave Lake. As we can see with this particular slide for Norman Wells, the water levels for the past 3 years are on the left, and the committee can see that, again, we're seeing the lowest on record water levels. The data that we are getting from ECC has been important in decision making earlier on in the season, as well as getting ready for 2025. I think I now have control, so I will attempt. There we go. Wanted to just flag for committee an interesting photo. Data is on the left, and then a photo year over year on the right, which just is a pretty stark contrast to what you can physically see about the change in water levels. Thought that that would be of interest to committee. Again, this is data around Norman Wells, and again, 2024, lowest on record. Moving into the Great Slave Lake area, summarizing the last 3 years, it's a stark contrast from 2022 and then now to 2024. As folks around this table will remember, 2022 saw historic high water levels, especially in the Hay River area and down the Mackenzie River. So change is definitely on the horizon as far as what happened in 2022 and where we are right now. And the last slide that I wanted to share was specifically around Hay River and we'll talk a little bit later about the harbor restoration work that's ongoing. But again, flagging the stark reality between 2022, where we did have a flood situation, to where we are now, where, again, lowest on record. I want to now hand it over to Mr. Hagerman, the Director of Marine Transportation Services, that'll walk us through a few more of the operational slides. So with that, I will pass along.
Thank you for that. I now recognize Director Hager. Please, if you would, proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Next slide. Okay. Wanted to share with committee a slide showing some satellite imagery. This is a picture of the ramparts just south of Fort Good Hope. The picture on the right was taken in May of 2023. The picture on the picture on the left was taken in 2023. Picture on the right was taken in 2024. And it shows the barriers, the challenges of trying to navigate through that water. There's literally a wall that's come across on the right-hand side of the picture on the right that it really sets it apart from the picture from 2023. And that particular ledge turns out to be a no-go for our vessels. The other thing that I'd like to point out as well is that the cancellation of Toledo and Fort Good Hope wasn't a result of just the water levels at the ramparts at Fort Good Hope. It was also a result of the water levels at Fort Providence and the Fort Providence Rapids. In fact, it was the Fort Providence Rapids that initially set us up for a situation where we weren't going to be able to get to Toledo and Fort Good Hope, or pardon me, Norman Wells. After the fact, then we found, because the water, obviously the ice moves on the south end of the river before the north, and so the north, when it was free of ice, that's what we were left faced with. Okay. This slide is a slide that shows where our equipment was left at the end of the 2023 season. Overwintering our assets in locations other than Hay River is quite common, and in this particular case was quite fortuitous for the startup of the 2024 season. Similar situation occurred at the end of the 2022 season, of which we had a similar slide that we presented to SCEDI last year that basically showed the locations where our assets were. What we ended up with this year was a small portion of our assets in Hay River, 2 mainline tugs and I think around 12 barges. The majority of our assets were in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk. So for season preparation, the first thing that I'd like to say is that planning starts with Marine Transportation Services literally at the end of a season. So we were planning for 2024 at the end of 2023, and from a calendar perspective, that's November and December. So how we start the physical aspect of this, getting ready for the season, is to make sure that our vessels and equipment are ready. Equipment being heavy equipment, actually, but mostly barges and tugs. So in the shipyard this year, we were doing refit work on the Vic Ingram and the Edgar K. Likewise, we were doing some third-party work for the Canadian Coast Guard on their vessel, the Ekaloo. And for point of reference, there's 2 Coast Guard vessels that put navigation aids in the Mackenzie. The Dumit operates on the north side and the Ekaloo on the south side. During the off season, leading up to the start of the season, leading up to the start of the season, we were in constant contact with our federal partners in more than just Canadian Coast Guard and Transport Canada, but they are the two main players. We were working with the Coast Guard because the plan was, of course, to get out of Hay River as soon as possible, hoping that we had enough water at the beginning of the season to get at least a couple tows out. The first tow, by the way, was scheduled to go to Toledo and Norman Wells, as was half of the second tow. The second tow's final destination was actually Tuktoyaktuk. So as far as the Coast Guard goes, it's been mentioned before that until they deploy their navigation aids on the river, we are unable to navigate. And as of this second, of this minute, of this hour, there are no navigation aids being deployed in the Mackenzie River from mile 952 down to the Fort Providence Bridge. So effectively, no navigation aids. And that in itself is reason enough, the rationale, I guess, the impetus for why we decided that we weren't going to be able to go. And it was low water, but then the no navigation aids was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. With Transport Canada, they assisted us with, provided us a lot of extra attention, I'll say, in regards to enabling us to be able to go out of Hay River as soon as possible, expecting that at the beginning of the season we were going to have enough water to actually go. So they were very key in getting us set up that way. For the weather and water data collection, as Tracy mentioned, we were in fairly regular contact with the hydrology group from ECC. Likewise, we got information from other sources. Some examples are we had drones that we took to Fort Providence on a number of occasions to get accurate intel. We also talked with a number of residents in the various communities to see what their thoughts are on what the water levels were like. And we also talked with current and past captains and crew. And I'd like to point out that, oh, did I do that? Sorry. I'd like.
Here, it's okay. Apparently, we're running into some technical difficulties, so our millions of followers on Facebook, Twitter, and whatever, please hold on, we're trying to reboot. Please continue with the presentation, and when you switch slides, if you could just let us know your switching slide as I'm advancing, that way we'll catch up appropriately when we're up and running. Okay. Director Hagerman, if you would continue, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So where we gathered our information from came from a variety of sources. So it wasn't one particular source. It was the result of collecting information from a variety of sources that allowed us to make well, it's a good decision, but it's a poor situation. The decision had to be made that we couldn't go. The poor aspect of that, of course, is that we have communities now that we have to figure out how to get their fuel and cargo to. The other thing that we did for scheduling and load development was we realized at the end of last year that we were going to start off, with low waters this season as well. So we adapted our schedule to accommodate for that, which in the beginning was we reduced our draft. So that's the draft is from the bottom of the barge to the water level. We reduced our draft from 5 feet, which is normal, to 4 feet. The result of that, it was the same result last year as well, and that's that if you lower the draft, that means that we have less cargo per barge, which means that we end up with more tows required in order to deliver the full complement of cargo. I'm going to switch to the next slide. Okay. So low water impacts. So one of the things that we did last year, and we're going to do again this year, is we're having fuel delivery made from over the top. This fuel will be used to supply the ISR communities down as far as Fort Good Hope. The tanker, fuel tanker that's going to be coming into to deliver that fuel for us is going to be arriving in Summers Harbor or Wise Bay. In the past, we have had the tanker come to Tuck, and we've been fairly unsuccessful in getting the fuel off in a efficient manner simply because of water levels and wind. So Summers Harbor and Wise Bay allows us to be, we're more isolated, more protected, and we'll be more successful. So cargo was redirected to the Beaufort Belt region at the MTS terminals. That was done in May. And as of the time that we made that decision, there was very, very little cargo that was actually had arrived at the terminal in Hay River. So the cargo for the ISRs was directed basically due to the Mackenzie not being navigable. Operationally, MTS is opening up the terminals in Tuck and Inuvik on this coming Tuesday, July 2nd. That's approximately 3 weeks earlier than normal. And we've also extended the cargo cutoff date for those two terminals to August 1st, which gives customers an additional 3 to 4 weeks in order to get their cargo to those two terminals. Yes. So. Okay. So customers started to make arrangements to have their cargo shipped in May. We have quite a few bookings so far from those communities, Paulatuck, Sax, Uluktuk, and Fort Good Hope and Kugluktuk. Then the last one is harbor restoration. Harbor restoration started in Hay River on June 9th, and it will run through until September 15th. We have two crews that are working in tandem. So the dredging is addressing two different locations at the same time. The one team is looking at what's called the plug, but that's the entrance or exit, whichever way you're going, in the Hay River Harbor. And the other one is over by Fisherman's Wharf towards the Coast Guard. And that work's underway as well. Next slide. Is that me? No? Okay. So for the community resupply for the ISR communities, the schedule says that, or shows that we will be leaving August 19th, and that those three communities will be delivered by the end of, by September 3rd. Kugluktuk will be the fourth community, although it's a Nunavut community, and that's scheduled to be delivered on September 7th. As been mentioned previously, MTS and fuel services are in constant, or maybe not constant, but very regular communication, because we are responsible to deliver that fuel to the communities on behalf of Fuel Services Division. Overall, we're looking at about 8.66 million liters of fuel that will be delivered, and that fuel will be coming off of that tanker that I mentioned in a previous slide that will be in Summers Harbor or Wise Bay, conditions depending. We also have Great Slave Lake, East Arm customers, including Parks Canada, Fort Reliance Cargo, and so on, tourism operators as well. Litzel Cay departure is scheduled for August 6th. And depending on what the conditions we're looking at as far as water on the lake and our ability to get close to our landing site at Litzel Cay, we have got one tow scheduled with a mainline tug. But if conditions suggest we take a different approach, we will take a smaller tug and make multiple trips. Yes, and we have the trip scheduled for Kugluktuk for September 6th. After the ISR barges are underway, then we move towards the North Warning sites. So that's a different fuel barge. It's from Crowley, who has the contract to actually do that. We subcontract the actual delivery part for them. That will be in late August. They're scheduled to show up, and like the previous, they'll be in Summers Harbor or Wise Bay for that to happen. And that brings my part to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. It looks like from the notes, we're now moving back to our ADM, so I'd like to recognize her again, please, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I know Mr. Hagerman mentioned about planning at the end of the season for next season. I know the team has been actually having active discussions now planning for 2025. So just wanted to share with committee that resupplying over this winter and those plans actively being looked at. We're also going to see what additional cargo will need to be factored in. We've talked a lot about weather and data today. That will continue. One of the weather patterns that we've been spending quite a bit of attention researching and following is the movement from El Nino to La Nina, and most recently had a discussion with the hydrology group to get a better understanding of what that means. We understand, and I will plain language this, I am not a scientist or a hydrologist, but we are now in a phase where we're between the two weather patterns, and La Nina brings more precipitation and cooler weather. We will be actively continuing to monitor that. We realize that that will not assist us this season. We will be watching the precipitation as it relates to it falling in the fall and creating moisture, and then having the snow create a barrier so that when the snow melts in the spring, we don't find ourselves in a drought situation. So the following of La Nina will be active. It'll be, of course, of interest for those that are working on our winter road system with cooler temperatures. Wanted to just share as well with the committee that the over-the-top concept that we've shared about bringing fuel from the West Coast will be continued into 2025. We made that decision to make sure that we've got some consistency of supply, we've got some security of supply, but it transfers into the next project that we're particularly excited about, which is the M18 well near Tuktoyaktuk that fellow committee member MLA Rogers has been actively supporting. Wanted to share with committee that our fuel services division, which is part of infrastructure's program and services unit, is having active discussions with the proponent about sourcing fuel from the M18 well in order for us to do the community resupply for 2026 for the ISR communities. Obviously, having local sourced fuel, import replacement, security of supply will allow some interesting opportunities for MTS from an operational perspective. Ideally, from a cargo and fuel delivery perspective, we are keen to get away sooner in the season, and having a local supply will conceivably allow for that. Many steps to happen between now and delivery in 2026, but wanted to share with committee that active discussions are happening between field services. Wanted to also share with committee some work that's happening around harbor restoration. Members are most likely aware that we've recently went through the regulatory process to obtain a Type B water license, and that harbor restoration work started a few weeks ago on June 9th. And the MTS team works very closely with the technical and design team with providing a small barge, a small tug and barge system to allow for that harbor restoration work to happen. The team is primarily focusing on the plug, and for those folks in the Hay River area would be very familiar, or for those that have flown into Hay River, you'll see at the entrance there is additional material that has accumulated over the years. That is the area that's being focused on this year. This will allow both MTS and Coast Guard to have vessels leave the Hay River area. Also, of course, a benefit to other users such as commercial fishers. Wanted to just let committee know that that work is actively underway, and MTS is providing a lot of support to the project with equipment and personnel to the contractor. Finally, I wanted to just mention that we are continuing to work with the Government of Canada to stress the importance of marine supply and letting them know that we have challenges and look forward to working with them and their supply chain office to figure out how we can continue to work together to have supports in the future. Harbor restoration, of course, being one of them. And then finally, we'd just like to thank committee for the opportunity to meet with them today and present what work we have underway and where we're going moving forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. ADM, any final comments from the minister before we go to questions? Not seeing any. I do have MLA McNeely online who would like to start off with the first set of questions, and I'll work my way around the room. No doubt, I want to point out that was a lot of information, and I think it was good for the public presentation, at least to provide some level of confidence that we're doing something. You know, in the absence of information, we think the worst, and you know, this helps. I'm sure helps everyone on the file, those especially impacted. MLA McNeely, I bought you a bit of time. Are you ready to go? Anytime you're ready.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the presentation there by the department there. I'm glad to hear, and you can understand my immediate concern is resupplying the two Sawtooth communities, Fort Good Hope and Toledo. So I look forward to getting information on how what the current volumes are for fuel and what is the top-up schedule. So that's my immediate concern, and I can really understand the low water levels. I just been told here a couple of days ago that there might be a possibility of Cooper barging leaving next week. And so we may get some supports there. The water levels here, there's quite a bit of debris and sticks and logs floating down, so it has come up a little, but it's still far below this annual levels. And excuse me. So I guess my question is. My question is the MTS department willing to participate? What I'd like to organize is a town hall meeting in Toledo, Norman Wells, Fort Good Hope for the clients that were impacted by the cancellation of the barge, and there's quite a number of them that I've been talking to. So we have this immediate resupply issue and this immediate repercussions and financial challenges caused by the barge cancellation. And from what I've been told by everybody, there people are saying this is not by any means a government's fault or MTS. It's a natural disaster which to a large degree is caused by climate change. So let's realize climate change is here, and let's see how we can adapt and move on. So that's the statement out there. So is MTS willing to accompany our town hall proposition to bring some financial aid or comfort or discussion to these three communities? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm going to start with the minister, and I'll just suggest, just for flow, if the minister wants to take the question, she lets me know, and then of course, if she wishes to pass it on, just point. That way I don't have to go through you back and forth, just to help things float along. That said, Minister, if you would please, to MLA McNeely's question, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Emily McNeely. Look, short answer is certainly happy to participate in some form of town hall. I think Emily McNeely actually had signaled some idea to this effect by email to myself and Mr. Cleveland, where both point on some of the work that's already underway. There's been effectively a version of that happening at an officials level. So in other words, folks from ITI meeting with their business counterparts that they have directly in the Sawtooth communities, chambers of commerce, as well as the regional staff that we have, both infrastructure and ITI, both the regional staff we have in these communities, to do exactly this, is to get a sense of what are the impacts, what are the costs of the impacts, what are anticipated impacts, try to understand what might be impacts. I mean, some of these things are, trying to assess what projects might be delayed, what does that do to a workforce, what supplies are delayed, what can make its way in, what supplies are delayed, and do they actually need them between now and February, or can they be mitigated with supplies already there, so on and so forth. So, this is obviously a dramatic event and was certainly unexpected, but trying to truly unpack what those impacts are to figure out where government can best fit itself in. That's not actually a small task. So again, that work's underway, but certainly happy to continue that and to participate in some fashion. And whether it's myself, whether it's Minister Cleveland, whether it might be MACA, I think that's also a question. I think we want to make sure we have the right people in that room to provide what the communities need. So short answer is yes, but just a bit of work to figure it out. I think there was actually a lot in there, but I'll pause and see if there's follow-up that the MLA wants to come back to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. And just before I go back to Mr. McNeely, I don't have anyone else on my list. I do have a ton of questions if we need a bit of filler built in while members are formulating their questions. But that said, I'll go to Mr. McNeely and let members know the list to ask questions is thin right now. Thank you. MLA McNeely, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the Minister for that information. I'm glad to hear that that the department is researching a time to bring information. That's basically what the public wants, is some assurances and the leaders on are we okay? Are we okay for fuel? And that could heat our homes and school until next winter road season. So I'm glad to hear that, and that's kind of like what I'll be sharing verbally with some of the people that I've been talking to in the communities, and saying just wait. There will be a date selected, and look forward to that information so I can publish that and let people know. So my next question is that on the operational side of AMTS. Are we going to lose any money this year? What measures are you taking now that your boats are parked? And is there operational costs that are being reduced or eliminated altogether because we can't sail? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MLA. I'll go to the Minister, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely going to be some costs involved. I mean, for one, we certainly do want to avoid any impacts to the folks who are employed in it through MTS, and they are not GNWT's public servants. They're employed as contractors, but it's a pretty specialized area, and finding the folks to man those boats becomes very challenging. So, even without all of the regular shipping, we're trying to maintain the staffing level so that we don't lose people, anticipating that this is hopefully a one particularly bad year and not an indicative of going forward. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it to Ms. St. Dennis. I think she's probably best placed to speak to a bit of what other work is still underway. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. ADM St. Denis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Further to the Minister's comments, absolutely there are fixed costs that we have as an operation. We do have various vessels that we still will be using for various trips, whether it's on Great Slave Lake or to the ISR communities. But I do note that the MLA's point about trying to find savings, we have, for example, most recently spoke with our insurer to see that if we could actually have some reductions in rates. So there is a corporate exercise to see where possible, where we don't necessarily have where we don't have necessarily fixed costs, where could we find some savings? But to the Minister's point, the impact of revenue will be a reality for MTS this year. Thank you.
For that. Not having anyone on the list, what I'll do is I'll go back to Mr. McNeely to see if he has any further questions at the second, or I'll fire off a couple for information. Mr. McNeely, did you have a further question?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Has there been any research done into the last application? I think I brought this up in mid-March here. Our federal contribution, I don't know the name of it, but there was some money access jointly between our government and the feds here to build and expand the storage tank farms there in one of the ISR communities. I think it was either Tucker and Nuvik. Has there been any research done into whether that's still proceeding ahead, or are we still in good standings with the bilateral agreement to access that money for that project? I think the amount was the feds kicked in $22 million and we were going to kick in some for a total of 30. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll go to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't have details on the fuel tank work right in front of me. I was trying to find it as I heard the question coming up, but I'm not pulling it up quite fast enough, unfortunately, I don't think. But look, there certainly was some effort underway from what I can recall. I think that at least one of the communities is seeing a fuel resupply rebuild, but I think at least one of the other ones had it come in significantly beyond budget. This is one of those cases where projects that were designed and estimated sort of in the 2019 timeframe, but that then were delayed when folks couldn't travel, saw significant changes to their budgets once we were able to get back into those communities in sort of 21, 22. So having larger fuel supply capacity isn't a complete or full answer, unfortunately. Now, that said, it's certainly something that remains on the radar. I don't know that we're getting a lot of support out of the federal government right now in terms of fuel resupply, anything that involves any kind of, anything that remotely resembles a fossil fuel doesn't seem to be an area that a lot of federal funding is flowing to, notwithstanding the lack of alternatives here in the Northwest Territories or across the North. But again, with the ISR communities generally, certainly still the hope is that between M18, which is coming online, and I believe they're looking to really ramp up and expand that, plus the alternative routing available, that will hopefully not be too, not be too great of an issue. Happy to get more information if the member is looking for details. We could send it to Lauren to speak a bit more on, or to Tracy to speak about fuel services. But look, Mr. Chair, let me see if that is enough for the time being. Thanks.
Thank you. Is that a yes? Mr. McNeely, I see you waving.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There, I guess my last question, I just bring it to this is information here. I recently found out that we're going to be hit with another another additional cost here. The Jet A fuel product's going to be airlifted into Norman Wells here for the airplanes, the skids, and Canadian North. So that's going to add another 30 points onto that that user product there for the airplanes and cargo and so on. So that can of coffee that costs $39, just do up your calculator and add 30 points onto that. That'll be retail. So that's information. My question is the department looking at, assuming that we're going to have similar levels here next year, or is the department looking at lower draft vessels that could be used with these water levels, assuming that it's going to be like that next year? Maybe trading in some old relics there and upgrading to newer shallow draft vessels, I guess, is my question. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Minister, on that question, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I know Emily McNeely was making a comment on the fuel, but actually it's one that I know we were hoping to speak a little bit more on the status of fuel storage, where we're at, what we're monitoring, what we're expecting, particularly given the ongoing wildfire efforts in the Sawtooth on top of the current challenges. So if I could, I'll send that to Tracy first, and then with respect to Mr. McNeely's or Emily McNeely's actual question on drafting barges, futures, I'll then send it over to my left. So if I could go for fuel, and then I'll leave it with you.
Not to worry, Minister, I followed completely. So I'll start with ADM, and when she's done, I'll go to the Director. So we'll start with the fuel question. Please, ADM, same thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to reiterate the Minister's comment, the fuel storage planning for the ISR, the estimates came in higher than the funding that was available. So right now we're working with the federal government to figure out how can we expand that funding or descope it if we're limited to X number of dollars. So active discussions happening right now. Speaking to fuel resupply, pleased that last winter we were able to top up fuel for Delaney, Toledo, as well as Fort Good Hope. Our fuel services division is in constant contact with our folks on the ground to monitor inventory levels. Those will be actively monitored as well. And then speaking to the resupply of fuel in Norman Wells itself, we have been working with Imperial as well as World Fuels. They're keeping us updated. They're currently having discussions with their clients to understand what the current inventories are and what the needs are going to be. And most recently spoke with World Fuels later last week and expecting an update. So it sounds like the MLA might have a bit more current information, but know that there's very active discussions with the airlines to figure out how to best manage the inventory before the resupply happens, starting in February. And like we did last year, successful resupply on that winter road. So thank you.
Yes, I'll now go to Director Hegerman if you want to continue on, I think, on the barge size question. Please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll start off by saying that the fleet that we currently have are purpose-built low draft barge tugs. They typically they need about 4 foot under the keel in order for them to maneuver safely. I would add that the conditions that we're faced with now, it's not just low water, it's the obstacles that have been that come up when the water goes down. So I'm not sure that we would be able to get, and I do mean I'm not sure, I haven't done much research in this area, but I'm not sure that we'd be able to find something that would have a lower draft that would still have the horsepower required in order to take our tows down the river or up the river when we come back, for that matter. So our plans are, yes, we will be monitoring our draft when we get ready for the 2025 season, as we did for the 2024 season. I mentioned earlier that we typically go at 5 foot. We plan this year for 4 foot. And I can tell that that the lowest that we can go is 3'8" with our current assets.
For that. Why don't I throw a couple questions out just to keep things moving along? So the Minister, when you mentioned in your opening remarks, you mentioned bolstering and you pointed out the federal government may have a response. Is there anything you can elaborate at this time on what that may or may not mean? Or if you can't elaborate because it's not clear, can you give us a general sense as to when we'll have some information? You have about 7 more little questions like that. I'll just take them off one at a time rather than try to unload them and allow you to unpack them. So, Minister?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, Mr. Chair, I don't have in this moment any sort of response, formal response from the federal government. I can tell you that what our approach has been is to firstly get a whole of government team together. So as I mentioned, infrastructure, MACA, finance, ITI are now, they've all got point people assigned to meet regularly starting at the end of session, and then meeting with the communities. Of course, then we were interrupted with the fact of there being an evacuation that has affected the entire SAW2. So that impacted the ability to meet with leadership in the communities, businesses in the communities who were very quickly all hands on deck to either to be evacuated or to accommodate evacuees. So our information gathering in that sense got a bit delayed for I think fairly obvious reasons. The intent was for the point people on this working group to meet with their teams and local community members and businesses and leadership, put that information together, and then be in a position to say, right, what gaps are there, what can be done, what kind of ask would we like to make. It is once we have that we're in a position to then say, what federal government department are we going to? And so that's, I think, the stage that we're at, now. And I, again, appreciated earlier on the comment of a town hall. That might be something that can feed itself into that, or that could be a place where we were able to respond back. I have no illusions that the federal government's machinery doesn't necessarily operate all that quickly, so we are hopeful to be able to go there, sooner rather than later. The challenge too, I'll just sort of close with this, is that although what's happening in the SAW2 right now with low water is particularly dramatic from climate change impacts, we have other communities that have been facing resupply challenges over the course of this year. So we're also trying to be mindful of how do we look forward to, at this point, it's no longer one-offs. It seems like it's one or another challenge at all times. I mean, even Wrigley right now is currently cut off because of a challenge with not related to a climate change impacts, but it's several days of closures there, just as was Tuck earlier this year. So trying to put that together so that the response is one that is meaningful, equitable, and forward-looking. But that's where the thinking is at right now, as I've said, and hoping to have some thoughts on what department we can direct and ask to, again, sort of sooner rather than later, but mindful of the situation we're dealing with in the SAW2. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'll forego I'll pause my questions. I have members who want to ask some questions, so I'll go to MLA Morris, please. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess just thinking long term, has the department started to think about alternatives to barging if this continues to be a problem? I don't know if the low waters are kind of a one-time event, but it seems like drought conditions are something that is likely going to be more frequent in the future. So yeah, I'm curious to know what the department is thinking kind of long-term in terms of alternatives if barging is just no longer going to be a reliable service over time.
Thank you for that, and I'm going to put a plug in by bracketing. Does this indicate highway? Minister, if you want.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I mean, yeah, look, the obvious answer is the Mackenzie Valley Highway, but there's also, ideas of dirigibles has been raised, drones has been raised, yeah, do we have a research and development division in the government of the Northwest Territories? No. So, right, I mean, just to kind of temper excitement is that those things have been brought to me in the last several years. I will say I think the awareness of the need to be creative about solutions is perhaps pushed upon when you face current emergencies and challenges. The downside of recurrent emergencies and challenges is that your, financial and human capacity to undertake creative and exciting things is drawn down. Any thought or dream that I might have had that we might someday pay our debt down, ekes away by the day when stuff like this is going on. Because it's a huge draw on capacity for wildfire capacity, environment and evacuation supports, and still looking at the impacts of what the low water resupply is going to be. So, and it is a huge drain and draw on staff and capacity. People are being redeployed across the Sawtoo and even within our shops to be able to help. So I know there's creative ideas out there. I can't see that there's a plan in this moment to go out and come up with alternatives. I will put the plug in for the road though. So we did recently respond. The board had put out an information request asking, what would your optimal construction season be? There's what's in the materials right now that we've filed on the Mackenzie Valley Highway is reflective of a view of let's, maximize capacity building, maximize employment, which would be a slower process of building. But with what the last few seasons seem to bring, both high and low water, the notion is to actually try, the optimal solution would be to have the road built faster and to have it available and could be in as quick as 3 to 4 years. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a couple further questions. Not being a MTS expert, but from a committee chair, of course, I would ask the question more so is, you pointed out the ramparts. This isn't news to any of us, and I don't refer to this year, which is the ramparts have been around for as long as people have been around. I know it sounds funny, but I'm quite serious about this. Has there been considerations about other solutions, such as, for example, portaging? And I know that sounds far-fetched, but that said, to build something that if we're looking at this going to be a challenging year, I don't know the depth of the Mackenzie. I don't know if it's even navigable, but I mean, are there other options? Is that the, wouldn't say singular, but is there stumbling blocks that can be overcome? May not be a fuel solution, but it may be a cargo solution when you're shipping up, for example, homes to communities in remote areas that they're easier to take on and off as opposed to. So I'm just saying, has there been thoughts ultimately around thinking out of the box for solutions like that? I mean, it is in the old days. Is there a reason we couldn't be experimenting in that area? And that's not my specific area, but I would think that someone in those shops would have some conversations, at least some ideas around those. So Minister, I'll start with you, and that's the right place to start.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No one has raised portaging with me, to be quite frank about it, although I'm relatively new to the MTS world. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how navigable even the surrounding area of the ramparts would be. So, it's a similar answer to what I've just said to the last question, which is that the road is really being right now presented as the primary and kind of most obvious solution. That is not only that, it's the far enough advanced, it's the farthest advanced of other solutions. I mean, it's been kind of built in bits and bobs over the last 20 years. There's a winter road that already exists. A lot of the bridges, what people don't realize, a lot of the bridges are already in place. A lot of the clearing is already done. I think people think there's nothing done. It's the route of the winter road really does follow up a lot of the way. So a lot of that work is there. It is a potential solution. Again, as I've said, that's, are there other potentially newer, innovative solutions? Maybe. We also have M18 coming online in the north, which again changes the dynamic of how far up are we going to have to go? What are we going to have to barge up? Will it be fuel or will it be only cargo? Anyhow, and will that then change? I should also, if I'm putting in a plug for our road, I should acknowledge that Beaufort Delta is very live to the state of the Dempster Highway right now. And I think I have a sticky note somewhere not too far away from me that says, to call my colleague over in the Yukon, because if they could refurbish effectively that highway, that would also reopen that right now. Right now there's some bottlenecks that make it too difficult where there's significant cargo that can't go up the Dempster. So we can't come either way. So we're really stuck. We can't go either side. So, anyhow, the two, opening up a couple of highway routes is still number one, but, beyond that, we're taking the ideas. I can certainly turn it over to the staff of MTS. I don't think there's never a bad idea to have more ideas. It's just realistically, I'm not going to say that there's like again, there's not sort of an innovative moment. It's been a bit of, let's just try to get things, I was going to say we try to stay afloat, but that is definitely the wrong word to use right now. So, thanks.
No, thanks. I just threw it out as a temporary solution. I wasn't thinking creating new solutions, around the bottlenecks. That's all I was trying to frame it around. I mean, the military can show up with these fancy, tech things, take things on and off within hours. I'm just thinking, do short-term solutions and around the bottlenecks. I see MLA McNeely has more questions, so. And I want to stress that wasn't to say the road didn't matter. It was only meant about could we find short-term solutions that made sense that would eventually just lead us to the end goal of the highway. So MLA McNeely, if you want to come back on, and then I'll go to MLA Morgan. She had some questions as well. Please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to share some information here, it's our government is currently absorbing a lot of cost because of this fly-in situation. I was up at the airport there last weekend, and the Department of ECC, I assume, chartered the 737 jet belonging to Buffalo when they were offloading totes. So I chatted with some personnel there, and they assumed that there would be 2 or 3 flights. I don't know the cost of that airplane on a charter rate there, but I can assume it's high. And today I seen one of the Electra bombers loading up with this red fire retardant. And so I can just imagine, what the cost of that fire is going to be in Fort Good Hope. And just to give you another idea on airlifting costs, last December, this government had to charter a Hercules or a Caribou model plane to bring in a generator for the Power Corporation in Fort Good Hope and Toledo. So airlifting costs is really going to be an extreme burden to our financial position. And is this going to continue? We can't even decide what's going to happen next week, let alone next year. But as MLA Morris said, this might be a annual occurrence. So what is our annual strategy over a 5-year period? And this is why I raised, if we look at our current system, bringing your cargo closer to your destination really helps your logistical planning. We can drive cargo to Fort Wrigley, and if we're building infrastructure in Toledo or Norman Wells, well, we can bring that material that far and with shallower draft tugs. And if there is entertainment for a partnership between the MTS and other companies that may have these smaller draft tugs. I don't know the draft tug of the Cooper barge, but there's other companies out there that would only probably willing to partner up with this government. So that's something else to research and look at. I don't know if there's willingness there to do that, but we really have to come up with some immediate resupply issues, whether it's trading in old barges for new ones, newer, more efficient ones designed to help us adapt to the current changes of climate. And then the long term, I totally agree with the minister. The long term is to build this road, and we're working together on that. And I'm glad that the MOU between this government or this SSI and this government is being actively honored. And we've had several meetings already. So that information is for committee. So I guess my question is there a willingness to for MTS to look at a partnership that might supply more efficient lower draft tugs? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA McNeely. I go to the minister, and maybe just for a reminder of all committee, just before I do that, we have MLA Morgan, and of course we're working towards a 2:30 closure, although we'll hold the minister as long as necessary. But that said, let's try to work towards that as well. So maybe after this question, I'll go to MLA Morgan and then back around, of course. Please, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I mean, I might sort of put pause in that answer, and the reason being that we've only just, I think, had a first initial or draft or interim, I'm not sure what the word is appropriate, but of a report back as promised with respect to MTS's governance, and subject to what direction Cabinet might give, and then bringing that to MLAs. That discussion is really the one of what the future of MTS might look like. And then from there, whether that brings about, I can say MTS hasn't exactly been a moneymaker of late, so I'm not sure that it's one that people are ripe to go and buy into whether it's as a private owner, private partner even. It has been several years of challenge. In fact, it's been several years of challenge, I think, ever since we took it on, and it was in CCAA when we took it in order to maintain the resupply. And in some ways, the last few years are an example of why having a government hand involved in the resupply has a role, because it ensures that things are going to move one way or another. So it's not to completely shut the door and say, no, we wouldn't have any creative ideas about how to run, who to partner with, et cetera. It's just to say that governance work has really just come to its fruition. And of course, it's come to its fruition at a time when the team is trying to make sure that communities are resupplied in a state of emergency and crisis. So making some proposals, getting them out, having them go to Cabinet, come to MLAs is just taking a bit of time given the circumstances. But that'll be the time when that discussion comes here. That'll be the time, I think, to really look, and I hope to have to be challenged by folks to say, what are those proposals the right ones? Are there others? Have you considered alternatives, et cetera? So appreciate the question, but as I say, kind of putting a bit of a pause on it for now. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go to ML Morgan for some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've talked a bit about thinking outside the box, and I also appreciate the minister's observation that when you are, have all your staff busy, try to deal with crises, you don't have that much time and resources for thinking outside the box. But I feel obliged to raise an issue that is usually raised at least once per assembly, which is, has anyone looked into the airships? Slow moving, but able to take large amounts of cargo, blimps essentially. Is that something that is on the radar once again, or have we buried this idea once and for all?
Is the issue deflated? Sorry, I couldn't resist. Let's put a pin in it and talk about it later. Minister, are you going? We have dreams being floated here.
It's just full of hot air. Oh my. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Look, my understanding is that Transport Canada doesn't have it as a fully regulated form of transportation yet. So I think it's still at it's perhaps not dissimilar to the discussion around small modular reactors, which is, I would really love it if Canada, federal government could say, hey, here's this great thing we might pilot. Who would like to do it for us? I don't think that's, they haven't approached me. I know Mines have asked, right? They've asked, are you folks looking at this? Because I think they're wanting to look at this, but it's, my sense is that it's technology that's on the edge, but not one that's, again, not fully regulated yet. We are a small jurisdiction. The GNWT is not going to be the ones that pursue the regulation of this technology. Not this or SMRs. We kind of will, if the minds go to us and say, are you guys looking at this? I kind of look at them and say, are you looking at this? Hoping someone else out there. But again, Transport Canada, my understanding there too, much like the Atomic Energy Agency, is that it can't be a commercial use that is where the pilot runs. It'll have to be some sort of a private sector or nonprofit sector. Anyway, more information there than perhaps what you're looking for. Because the short answer is it was raised in the last assembly. I've had folks approach through my former hat at ITI now and now with infrastructure. There's folks in the private sector, folks in the academic world that approach and say we're doing things, they look promising, but as government being perhaps a little more risk averse than what an academic institution might be or what the private sector might be, we're saying, okay, and is it good to go? So if I am mistaken, if we're mistaken, if there's something else happening, I'm certainly hoping we want to be apprised of that. I think I feel safe to say that even with the emergencies, that the staff in infrastructure writ large do keep their eyes on these kinds of things, frankly, because of questions like this asked in the House or asked by committee. So I do appreciate sincerely the question. It helps remind us to stay on top of what's happening in the space. But that's sort of the sum total of what we have for the moment.
Anything further? Okay, so, Mr. Narasu, please, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Looking at the Mackenzie Valley Highway, it's something that has to be looked at very carefully and considered, because I worked on the ITH2 and it's having its challenges right now due to climate change. And the work was done during the winter season, and the winter season is getting shorter. So they did the work, I believe, in the winter season because they didn't want to disturb the permafrost. And they stated the winter season is getting shorter, so more of a statement than anything that the Mackenzie Valley Highway, has to be looked at very, very seriously. Danny, MLA McNeely has been spearheading this. Okay, ma'am, I have a question on, is the Klavik adequately supplied, or are they being resupplied this year through Nuvik or Tuck?
Thank you for that, Mr. Narasu. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Aklavik, my understanding, Mr. Chair, does have, as with some of the other communities in the region, does have a private resupplier rather than fuel services division. But I'm thinking, this is a Steve question? Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Minister. Director Hagerman, if you would enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister is correct that the fuel that gets supplied to Aklavik is done via a company out of Inuvik, APS. And we have been in communication with them in order to get some fuel from Inuvik over to Aklavik. We're in I wouldn't say negotiating period at this point. It's more in, we need to be assured that there's enough water in Aklavik in order for us to get the fuel over. And literally that's where it's at this point. In the past, APS has used trucking methods to get fuel over to Aklavik. I would imagine, I've never been to Aklavik, but I would imagine that the fuel's probably fairly pricey there. I did hear a rumor that Aklavik has the most expensive fuel. But that's where we are with that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Anything further from the member, Mr. Narasu? Okay, thank you. Just as we're winding down, not seeing anyone else, I'll just throw out a comment first. My worry, of course, is the business case or viability of NTS, no fault of its own, dwindles every day as the water goes, and that's not meant to be a pun, it's the truth. I mean, if you can't float barges and tugs, etc., I mean, it becomes a challenge. I would hope that the department through MTS or whatnot is looking at it. I mean, if there was discussions about closing low or unused facilities, I mean, how long do we run a business that's unviable or just becomes unfortunate? And it's not, again, not fault of its own. It's just a situation. You need water. And The other observation being is I'm sure the fleet becomes less valuable every day, which is how many years can we have a fleet that's stranded and underutilized or underserviced again without the water. I certainly hope that La Nina, if I said it right, we have a much better year, and obviously we'll know probably by early new year if it's starting to shape up in that direction or not. But I'm hoping that the department will eventually start having those hard questions and at least asking themselves, is this the right direction? That said, the question I really have left for today, at least from my perspective, is what are we doing with the stranded fleet? And so it's a two-part question, which is what are we doing with it in the Hay River area? It's very expensive infrastructure sitting there, so what happens to it? Is it being repaired? Is it sitting? Are we taking advantage of a low time in the sense of opportunity that things can be done that were ignored for years? I'm sure things aren't ignored for years per se, but whatever that appropriate maintenance is required, as well as is there an opportunity to float, drive up, or reposition the fleet sometime early summer, because I imagine late summer is going to be a risk. So most of the high levels will probably diminish over time. So in other words, sending a light load, no load up in order to ensure it's not stranded another year in the Hay River zone. Even breaking the assets up in the sense of more assets north versus south. And that's not me subtly saying we should close the MT shop in Hay River. That's me just saying, how do we prepare for next year to make sure it's viable? So Minister, really about equipment usages, viability of asset management, and what are we doing for next year? And then it looks like I have at least one more question from a member, and we'll go to them after that. Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, yeah, a couple things, and I will actually think you're going to get the whole table on this one. But let me just quickly start on the opening comments around sort of the business case for MTS. Like the GNWT is the biggest client for MTS, and much as the business case for the Mackenzie Valley Highway doesn't depend on there not being MTS. Right? I mean, that Mackenzie Valley Highway brings potentially so many other benefits and redundancies and securities for a resupply route that, MTS can keep on rolling. We're not relying on that. So it's not like, you shouldn't have both. The cost of barging so far is vastly better in terms of its, the impacts financially, that the preference here is to get back in the water. And in doing so, this year was actually one year where there was at least the one contract that I think last time we were here in March we described from a private sector to take stuff up into Alaska. There was, opportunities. Yeah, there's opportunities obviously with Transport Canada, with defense, with so. Do I ever expect this to be an opportunity to seriously bring in cash as a revenue generator for the government? Probably not. At the same time, we are a territory of 33 small communities, many that rely on that barge service and resupply. And if this is a way to ensure the provision of supplying them at the lowest cost option, it may be one of those situations where we're never going to make money on it, but we still have to find the lowest cost way to do it and to deliver that service. So that's the thing with the governance, is to try to figure out what is the best way to do it. We bought it in, 2016, 2017, and kind of have been in a bit of a, let's just get the communities resupplied rather than stopping and thinking about how we're doing it. So I don't disagree with you that finding the most optimal way to run that service is an overdue necessity. Not running the service is probably not going to be one of the options we have in front of us. That said, on stranded assets or not stranded assets, or where things are in their optimization right now, I want to start with Tracy, and then I think we'll probably hit Steve, because I think this is something that I do think it's really important that people understand what is happening at the shipyard, what is happening with the assets, what are we doing today to minimize impacts and also to maximize their value going forward. So ADM first, please.
And just before I go to the ADM, I want to stress, I see Let's OK being, supported for many years. And I mean, there's many components, I understand that. I'm just saying as an overall, it'll have to have that hard get itself on how it does business. That said, ADM, if you would please help us with the asset question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll let Mr. Hagerman get into a little bit more detail, but on his slide earlier in the presentation, he spoke to assets being in the southern part of the territory and in the north. And that actually bode well for us this year, that we actually were able to support the ISR deliveries. The minister speaks to enhanced utilization, and depending on where we end up with the governance model, there might be more flexibility to utilize that equipment. That will be a key motivator on how we move forward. Anyway, just wanted to maybe reiterate, it's not so much about having stranded assets, but to the chair's point, more of fully utilizing them in a normal operating year. And ideally in a normal operating year, which of course we hope with La Nina, we start seeing that again, because in 2022 we were in a flood situation. It's about always being ready for the unexpected. And by having assets both in the south and the north, that allows us the most flexibility to respond and be able to operate in those unusual environments. So with that, I'll just see if Mr. Hagerman has anything else to add. But we've recently just added a small tug to help with harbor restoration. So it really is about complementing what we have with a few more options in our pocket. So with that, I'll pass it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Director Hagerman, if you would, and then we'll go to Ms. Reid for a final set of questions, and then I'll work to wrap up. Thank you. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to what's going on in Hay River, we are using this as an opportunity to clean things up that we haven't looked at probably since the assets were bought from NTCL. I know this has been mentioned before, but we've got a very small crew of GNWT folks and a rather large crew of ORC folks. So we don't always have the time available to us to focus attention on certain areas. But this year, I guess if there's a silver lining in what's going on right now is that we do have the time available to now focus our attention on the shape of the shipyard, the shape of the synchro lift. We've also are focusing attention on the Jock McNiven, getting it back into service. The other thing that's coincidental but very good for the other actions that are going on in Hay River is that in a normal season, we would be using a harbor tug to get our tows ready to leave. And in fact, this year we have no tows going out of Hay River. So what that means is that we have more assets and more time available to assist in the harbor restoration. So that's a bit of well, that's a good news thing for sure. The other thing that I would say is that what we've learned over the last 2 years, so I'm going to go back first, and that's that breaking the program up into a north-south thing, as an example, that's been talked about literally for decades, and it's just been talked about. The last 2 seasons, we have had a significant part of our assets in the north. Stranded first would be the right word to say, but the reality of it is that it's been beneficial for us, by coincidence, I suppose, that it helped us to get our tows built and to get our deliveries done quicker than we would if everything was in Hay River. So the other part of breaking the program up into a north-south thing is one would also have to look at the condition of the Tuk and Nunavut terminals. They are in rather poor shape. NTCL, as we know, went bankrupt, and they went bankrupt for a reason. And a result of that is that they did not invest money anywhere. I would even question what they invested in Hay River, but they certainly didn't invest any money in Tuk or Nunavut, which would mean that there would be an investment required in order for us to have an effective presence in Nunavut or Tuk.
Thank you for that. I go to Ms. Reid, please, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So ADM St. Dennis mentioned that you want to be ready for the unexpected. So how about some expected items. So I would be remiss if I didn't thank staff for bringing this to our attention, but BC Hydro plans to fill the reservoir associated with the Site C Dam on the Peace River in late summer of this year, which will have impacts throughout the Mackenzie River Basin. So ECC staff are estimating that the Great Slave Lake could temporarily drop by as much as 8.5 centimeters. So my question is whether the Site C impacts are expected to have a tangible effect on operations, and will harbor restoration, not dredging, in Hay River be sufficient to ensure the continuity of operations if the Great Slave Lake drops by that much? Thanks.
Good question. Minister, do you want to take that one on?
Without anyone from ECC here, I guess I'm probably equally well placed. Oh, but you know what? We have a volunteer.
Okay, thank you, Minister, for delegating or volunteering the ADM. If you would, please.
Chair, the work that's currently being done with harbor restoration with dedicated vessels will absolutely help when it comes to any reduction in water. Director Hagerman also spoke about the ability to use different equipment should we find ourselves approaching Little Cay and having challenges with water depth. So the advantage of having a variety of vessels in a variety of places gives us an opportunity to take a variety of approaches. Obviously, we don't know what the full impact will be on the decision being made in British Columbia. The team at ECC has been keeping us updated. We will be continuing with our regular updates with them, but I don't want to provide a qualified, we absolutely have every angle covered. But the fact that this government is spending money on harbor restoration when in fact it hadn't been done in over a decade, and the fact that we've been able to bring on a smaller vessel to not only work on harbor restoration, but also support a different smaller vessel helping with Little Cay. We've got more tricks in our pocket. I'm trying to find the actual correct analogy. The reality is we're better suited now than we were a year ago. And that may not be all of the answers, but it's more than when we had a year ago. And I think the dedicated resources to getting that harbor restoration work done in advance of the August 6th, we've got a couple months to get a lot of that work done, will bode well to having a successful season. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Anything further from Emily Reid? Yes, please, if you would.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess further to that, and maybe just drilling down specifically in the restoration, if the water levels do drop by that much, is that being anticipated in that work, so that perhaps, I know you're trying to stay away from more dredging, but is the dredging going to be sufficient? Thank you.
For that, I'm looking for EM, please.
You believe it will be? But
You had me.
certainly.
Okay, go ahead. It's on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point in time, we are cautiously optimistic that the work that's underway, regardless of the amount of sediment moved, it will be helpful. We're cautiously optimistic.
And thank you for that. And so, not seeing anything further, I think that was Ms. Reid. So, folks, I believe that brings us to the end, but not the finish. So with that said, I'd like to thank our witnesses here today for the presentation. And as always, I wish to thank the millions of viewers on our social media, etc., following us from all over every corner of the earth. Very interested. But in all seriousness, I want to thank the department for this update. It's very helpful and useful for members around the room, but that said, it's probably very helpful for the public to have a sense of what's happening. I did want to underscore one thing. I just want to use the chance here is by all means, I certainly see a future for MTS, and if the government isn't finding a solution, the public will, and it may be at a ferocious cost. So the government may be the best solution, and that's really what I was trying to drive at is, are we doing the business the best way as possible? And sometimes it means government intervention. So that said, and last comment. Separately, but same portfolio, the department may want to send a drone up the Mackenzie Valley, well, maybe not a drone, but some type of drone system to give people a better sense of how far that Mackenzie Valley Highway is, because you point out the bridges are being built, are built, and I was aware of that, but people may not have any sense of what it looks like, or probably. But that said, just food for consideration, thought for consideration, or consideration. Folks, at this time, I'd like to now call the discussion or hearing closed. And again, I want to thank all the members in attendance as well as the staff for work together. Thank you, Minister.